Hey everyone, this is Daniel, and in today's video we're going to look at Power Apps patch function options for SharePoint. And we'll look at it from two separate scenarios. One is when you're adding or editing or deleting single items, and the other one is doing it in bulk. So I'll share some tips and tricks with you when I walk through the whole process, especially for that bulk one, where I'll teach you how you can actually shrink that entire formula and make it so much more easier to work with. So stick around. This is a very important video that you don't want to miss. But first, here's my intro video. So let's get started. Now, in the first scenario, we're going to go ahead and do single item patching. And to make that really interesting, I went ahead and created a very complex SharePoint list, not so much as how many columns it has, but the type of columns it has. So let's go take a look at that first so you get a good idea. So here's what looks like a simple SharePoint list. But when I go to the site settings, when I go to the list settings, there you can see that I've kind of made this very challenging. Sure, I've got the single line of text and I've gone ahead and added some number columns, but I also went and added a multiple lines of text. I went and added some lookups, choices, date and time, and I even went and added that manage metadata time. So you know that that patch function gets very interesting, very fast when you go ahead and use this type of columns over here. Now, a couple of things I want to look over here is that when you go and do the multiple line of text, in the multiple line of text, I personally go ahead and select the plain text because anytime you use this enhanced rich text in Power Apps, you start getting some weird characters over there and the text just doesn't flow. So I went and selected the plain text column over there. So something just to keep in mind. And for everything else, I pretty much left it as is. I mean, obviously for the lookup, you've got to go ahead and look up the other columns which you have in SharePoint. So that's something very easy over there. Same thing for the pet type. When you go and select the pet type, which in my case is the manage metadata type, when I go and select on it, you've got to go ahead and select which taxonomy, which is the manage metadata type that you've got to go ahead and select. So all of that is pretty standard, but you've got to go ahead and do that as well. Finally, in this case, did you notice something? That my required column over here is blank. This is something that I do because by default, when you create a SharePoint list, you have something called as the title column, and that title column is always required. I let that be controlled from the Power Apps standpoint, which means that in Power Apps, I dictate which column should be required and which should be not. I don't want the backend data source to be dictating that because sometimes it gets a little confusing that you will have to go ahead and add an item or update an item when there's nothing that has to be updated over there. So I always go ahead and remove this from this side, from the SharePoint side, or in general, the backend data source. Let the Power Apps Canvas app handle that. So now that we've seen these columns and all the interesting SharePoint lists that we have, let's go take a look at it from the Power Apps standpoint. So here we are in my Power Apps Canvas app, and I've already gone ahead and made it just like a home screen or an initial screen where I'll actually go and select which other screens I want to go to. So over here, I'm going to go and select a single items, and that takes me to this screen. And as you can see, I've got pretty much a gallery on the left side and I've got some controls over here, and then I can select even any of the existing ones. I can go ahead and select it. It gets automatically populated. And then I can also go and add a new item, and then all the fields get empty. What I want to show over here is that the reason, one of the big reasons why we use patch column is it gives you the flexibility to come and design the way you want it, especially when you have a SharePoint list in the back end. Well, what does that mean, Daniel? I mean, I know I can use an edit form as well. Does the Canvas app specifically for the patch function, does that give me a better option? Technically, yes, and I'll prove that to you. So remember the list that we just saw? This is the columns we're going to use to patch to that data source. However, if you went ahead and used an edit form, this is what the edit form looks like. Now, don't get me wrong, this is pretty good. And if you're comfortable with this, then you can completely skip the patch function. And trust me, you will save yourself a lot of time with the formulas if you just use this edit form. Because let's face it, in the edit form, the only function you need is the submit function. That's it, that's all you need. However, there is a difference in the look, right? Because over here, this is what you have. However, if you go and take a look at from the other side, I can go ahead and make it a little bit more nicer. For example, the choice tab column, in the choice tab column, and you actually go and get it from SharePoint, it by default goes in and gives you the drop-down functionality. However, I can go ahead and say, I don't want the choice tab column. I want a toggle switch instead because it just looks nicer. Well, in that case, I'll go ahead and use this functionality and I'll use the patch function. So I just thought I'd at least share some ideas. At the end, you decide which one you want. But in this scenario, to make the form look a little nicer, I went and used the patch function over there. All right, so now let's just pretend like we're going to submit something, and we'll go ahead and see how that looks. So I'm going to first just say Jane Doe. I'm going to put in the 123 Main Street Boulevard. That's Street Boulevard. Now here it gets very interesting. I've got state and city. So first what I'm going to do is that I'm going to first search for state. And in the United States, we've got 50 states. So I'm going to make it search. Now keep this in mind, SharePoint is a delegated data source. But when it comes to the search, it uses the filter function, all right? And the filter function always starts from the first character. So I live in the state of North Carolina. So I'm just going to start by saying NOR. And the moment I do that, it gave me two options. There's North Carolina and then there's North Dakota. So I'll just select the first one, which is North Carolina. Now, based on what I selected over here, the cities got filtered. And the cities get filtered. And so right now I can go ahead and just start for Charlotte. And I can pick Charlotte. Again, it's not a search, it's a filter. And the filters always looks from the first character. But it's still, when I went into the search, all of these cities, trust me, are already filtered to only show up the ones that was the selected state. And then over here in the zip code, I'll just go put in something, you got that. Then single bed or double bed. Now, just for clarification, this is me pretending like I'm doing a hotel reservation. Therefore, you've got all of these columns. And you actually have seen me do this a lot in some other examples as well. So I went and did single. It's definitely non-smoking. Do I have pets? Yeah, actually, I do have pets. And I'm going to go ahead and select a dog. So these are the options. And then over here, when it comes to the calendar, I'll show you something a little interesting. Say, oh, hey, I'm going to select the date. Obviously, I'm going to go and start on a Monday. And then I'll go ahead and depart, say, on a Thursday. Now, some of you who've been paying attention, they say, hey, Daniel, that date control looks a lot more fancier. We know that doesn't come out of the box in the SharePoint, in the Power Apps Canvas app. Where did you get that? There is a trick to that. The trick to that is to go ahead and get it directly from Microsoft Teams. So open up your Microsoft Teams, go ahead to the Canvas App Studio over there, go and pretend like you're creating a Canvas app. Just copy that date control and paste it over there. Literally, it's a Control-C, Control-V. You paste it over here and it just works. You don't have to do anything else. You just paste it over here and the control works. In fact, I've done a whole video on how to go and do that. I'll put that link below. But that's as simple as it is. Open up the Canvas app over in the Teams Canvas Studio and just copy and paste that control here. And then after that, I'll just go and put in a text in the final piece over here. This is the multiple line one. This is the one that is going to say, I may check in as early as 12 noon. All right, so I'm just going to put that text. Let me pause over here and talk about a few things as to what these controls are. This single line of bed and then the smoking, non-smoking, these are the choice type columns that came in. Pets also choice type column. And you can see because in the SharePoint out of the box took choice type columns and gave it as a drop down, I was able to go ahead and make it as a toggle switch. Now this pets type, if you remember the SharePoint list we saw, that is a manage metadata type column. So that gets a little interesting. And then all of these are also the single line of text ones that we've gone ahead and used. These are all the lookups. The city and the state is a lookup. And then we also have the date times over here. So now I'll go ahead and click on save. I'll click on save. It's asking me, are you sure? Because I'm always prefer with the trust but verify. And the moment I do on save, I'll click on yes. And then it goes and shows me this new one. Now I want to pause over here and kind of clear a doubt that people have is that when it comes to me patching, do I need to refresh the data source to make sure that my gallery gets updated? Now, I'll tell you, I'll be very honest with you. Once upon a time, when we are going like 5 years ago, you had to do that. But Power Apps Canvas app has tremendously improved its performance over the past 5 years. So now you don't have to use a refresh command or anything like that, or even a reset command, especially refresh in this case. I just published it. The gallery in this case is connected or tied to the SharePoint list. It automatically went ahead and updated. It is really that powerful. So just something to keep in mind for that. All right. Now I'll do one more thing. Let's go and we went ahead and added the new item. I'll go and click on it, and now we'll go and update the item. So important things to look at. Okay, these are still controls that I've added. This is not an edit form. And the moment I selected the edit option for the pencil, this pencil button over here, it automatically went ahead and pre-populated. So what I want to prove to you is that I can come over here and I can make a change. Like for example, my departure date, I'm going to push that out by say instead of departing on the Thursday, I'm going to push that out to the 30th. I can say that I'm not going to go ahead and bring any pets, so that will go off over there. Now I'll go and click on yes, and I'll go and save, and I'll go and click on yes. and now it went ahead and updated that item. And the moment you see it went and updated it, it's automatically selected. And when I select it, it saved everything as is, including the date and the pets over there. The data has saved. So now that you saw the demo, let's go and take a look at the formulas which are happening in the backend, and we'll also take a look at the few controls. So I'm going to get off from this demo side, and I want to show you a couple of things. Right over here, I'm going to scroll out of the way. You will see that this is the screen that it's working from, the patch single item screen, which is this one over here. And I can prove it to you that this is the gallery. You can see that's the gallery. And all of these are all individual controls that are happening. See, there's no edit form. They're all individual controls. But the magic now happens in that final patch function that we happen over there. But since we're here, let me show you a few other things. There's an interesting thing which you see. Like this section over here, this is actually a gallery. Now this gallery's data is coming from a very separate SharePoint list. I actually have a list called as state county code. What that does is it only goes ahead and saves all the information about all the states, the 50 states, and then what is the code associated with that. In this one, and so therefore there's only 50 items, by the way, in this list. This one here has a whole bunch more. But what I've done is I've used the filter function. So check this out. In the left one over here, all I do is I just make sure that I do use the starts with, because that's how it starts with inside the filter function. And that really works well. So that, in case you are trying to do a search type functionality inside SharePoint when technically search is not available. But the filter is really powerful because you are able to use the starts with function inside the filter. And check this out. When I click on it, it is 100% delegable. See, you didn't see any squiggly lines over there, which means it can do a server-side search or a SharePoint list-side search, even if you have more than 2,000 items over there, because you see no squiggly line. And once I went and selected this option, it'll go ahead and use that in this section as well. See, when actually it's not the selected one, it's the one that I populated in the text. See, because in the text, it is the default one, which is the selected one that's coming in. Now, when I go to this list over, this gallery, that gallery is still getting searched. The search is coming using the filter and the starts with, but it's using a combination of the starts with. The starts with is coming both from the state side and it's also coming from the city side. So it's going ahead and making sure that the search is coming from a combination of whatever state I selected over here. See, that starts with is happening, and it's also coming with the starts with of the city over here. So that's how I'm able to get the full filter functionality. And then I went ahead and populated all of them. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on that because some work had to be put in over here. Now, if you notice that I've also gone and put in the pets function, if I go and toggle that to on, I've got this pets function over here. So Daniel, how did you get a manage metadata type column information over here? And in that case, I'll show you. See, if you see, when I selected on the canvas, it actually went and showed me a group. And the group is combination of two things. Well, first, there is just a very simple label, but then this section is coming in as a gallery. I went ahead and got it as a gallery. And check this out. See, I go ahead and use this combination. The choices, you've got to go ahead and use the caret, the add some functionality for the SharePoint list, and then the column name. So just to be sure, if I go back to my SharePoint list over here, the one which has all those complex columns, I go to the list settings. It is the pet type. Pet type is the one that has the manage metadata. And so now I come over here and I go to my choices and I make sure that for this gallery in its items property, this is the formula that you need. So you can go ahead and get all of the items from a manage metadata, but portray it in your Power Apps Canvas app as a gallery. And they all come in just like that. Again, without any delegation problem whatsoever. It just works. So you've seen all the controls. Now let's take a look at that important patch function. So when I now click on the save button, all it does is it goes ahead and sets a value of the variable. And when I set the value of the variable, I'm actually going to click on my Alt key over here, and then I'll go and click on the save button. It goes and shows me this grouped item. And you've seen me do this hundreds of times. I go ahead and always do this trust but verify that, hey, you're saving it, but are you sure you want to save it? And I also add a little trick to that. You see how this in my label, this over here is actually a label, but when I add its fill functionality, by default, this is a 1. So if I go and take out those, this is 1, this is what it looks like. However, I actually remove that 1 and I put in a usually 0.8, so it filters it just a little so you can even see all the data that is in the backend. Because let's face it, sometimes somebody is, selected the yes, they want to save it, and then you're asking them, hey, are you sure? you got to give them a way to see that, what was it that I actually put in for the first name? But now with the filter functionality, they actually see, oh yeah, the first name was Jane. So yep, that's good. And now I'll go and click on save. So always try to do something like this, make it a little bit more user-friendly. People will really appreciate that. So I'm going to click outside, and now we're going to click on this yes button, because in this yes button, this is where all the magic happens. Now, granted, it looks like a lot is happening over here, and I agree there is, but let's break it down and then we'll actually understand what the heck is going on. So the first thing we've got to understand is that there's two scenarios this is used. One is when you're adding a new item and when you're going ahead and patching or updating an existing item. So anytime when you go ahead and see a patch function and you've got defaults over here added to it, that is always a sign that a new item is being added. So keep that in mind. Now, before I've actually put in an if function. This if function will dictate if there is going to be a new item that is added or if it is going to be an existing item that is being updated. So inside my function I've put in, my if function, it's basically a combination that inside the if function is your edit form a false. False means if it's false, it's a new item. And if it is true, yes, I am using an edit form to update an existing item. So in my first type, I've actually gone and put in false, which means I am adding a new item. But then check this out. After that, I am putting some heavy amount of comments over here because it makes it very easy for me to come in tomorrow, next week, next month, heck, next year, and actually understand what the heck is going on over here. So let's see that, right? What I did was, for the sake of this video and for my future verification, I've gone and broken it down based on the column types. So the first section over here, we've got single line of text columns. So now I know right by default that first name, last name, address, notes, these were all simple single line of text that came in. And therefore now all of them, I had to basically just go ahead and grab the control names. You see, each of them had a control name, the first name, last name, address, notes. These were all controls. So if I come back and I'll go ahead and click no for now. See this name, that is the first name text. This is the last name text. This is how I go ahead and get those control names because I need that for patching. A little off topic on this one is you don't have to go ahead and rename all their controls. I personally don't do that myself. However, it is absolutely important that those that you're going to use for your patch function or any select, or you're going to go and reference it in some way, go ahead and name those controls because that's important. And then you come up with whatever naming convention you have, whether you want to put the text like TXT or TEXT, you can put that as a postfix or as a prefix or a postfix. You decide however you want. Highly recommend that you at least have some naming convention. So I'll go ahead and I'll click on my Alt button, click on save, and we'll click on the yes again, and let's go continue looking at this formula. Now, by the way, I've taken all of this patch, like the one you see over here, I did a copy and I pasted it down in the description below. That way, if you're going to go and replicate this, especially those complex ones, you don't have to just see my screen and type it again. Do a copy and paste from the description below, because that way you can just go and paste it into your own Power Apps Canvas app and just tweak the control names, but you've got the full function over here, all right? So we went in through the single line of text. It worked really well. Number columns, now this gets a little bit tricky sometimes because what happens is in the control, we've actually gone ahead and used a text column. So when you're patching it to a number type column, you've got to go ahead and put in a value prefix. That will convert any text that you have. It converts that into a number, and therefore you're able to patch that into your column over here, which is the zip code, amount, and cash. Those are numerical columns in SharePoint. Now there's actually numerical data coming in. If you don't do that, you will start getting some errors and some squiggly lines over here. All right, so that's basically the number of columns over there. All right, so we went ahead and took care of those two, which were pretty simple. Now let's go into some really interesting ones. So let's go and start with the lookup column. Now, for those who don't know, SharePoint lookup column does exactly what the name says, is that you've got a column, but it actually is referencing another SharePoint list. And that is the list that gets referenced in your lookup column. So when it comes to the lookup column, you have to do some way to reference that other column. And that's exactly what we do over here. This OData type Microsoft Azure connectors .SharePoint SP list expanded reference does what I just said, is that it is referencing that lookup column. But you need to tell Power Apps somehow that, hey, I do need to reference that column. Therefore, you've got to put this OData type prefix. You have to do that. And then after you've done it, you got to put two more other things, because how does it know what is the ID of the lookup column and what is the value that you're getting from lookup column? And therefore, you've got to put in the ID function and you've got to put the value function. And all the controls that you have over here. So remember, for that state one that I showed you, the one when I'm doing filtering, it's a gallery. And so that's all I did, is I went ahead and mentioned the gallery name dot selected dot ID. Why did I use ID? Because I'm referencing that to this ID function over here. When I switch over to the value, I do the exact same thing, but in that case, it's not the dot value, it's the dot what. Like for my state, it was another list. All the states were in the title column of that SharePoint list, and that's why I have title column. For the city one, I actually named that column as city, so I went ahead and referenced that. Also, the way SharePoint works is that if you started, typing in the gallery name dot selected and you hit dot, IntelliSense will start giving you advice like, hey, you should try title, or in this case, you should try city. So always go with the help that the IntelliSense gives you, because it actually makes it a lot easier for you to select the correct column type. And those two are the lookup columns. Granted, you do have to go ahead and put in this O data type formula, but that literally is a copy and paste. You don't have to memorize this. You don't have to know what the entire formula is. Literally copy and paste. It's just the ID and the value that you got to be really sure of from which gallery that's coming over there. All right, so now let's go and take a look at the choice type columns. And in fact, it does get a little easier from here, because what you've done is we've already looked at the lookup one. The choice type columns are very similar. The choice type column is also going ahead and referencing the columns that SharePoint is going, because the difference between the lookup and the choice is that in the choice, right there, the list, you're giving a list. For example, when I go back to my SharePoint list over here, you see the lookup. The lookup is only referencing choices from another list and another column. The choice type column doesn't reference anything from external way. What it does is when you click on it, it actually shows you that no, these are the choices. You manually enter your choices over here. So they do, the lookup and the choice do behave something that it's actually grabbing a list. Lookup goes ahead and references another list. Choice, you actually have to manually submit the choices over here. So that's the big difference. Therefore, you actually do see a little bit of similarity in the formula as well. As in like this O data type formula, it's the exact same as the one between. The only thing I had to do was I got to now be a little tricky, because remember, when I said that if I use the edit form, it puts it as a drop down. However, because I wanted to make this form a little bit more complicated and stylish, I used the toggle switch. And in the toggle switch, moment you go and add a toggle switch, it only has two values. It's true and false. So if you've toggled something on, that value is true. If you toggle something off, that value is false. So you got to tell Power Apps that, okay, what does my false stand for? What does the true stand for? So in our form, we actually go and take a look at our form. By default, it is off, which means by default, it is false. But my false actually stands for a single bed, or the false actually stands for non-smoking. See, and in this case, for pets, the false actually is no. And now if I were to go ahead and now toggle it on, which means I would set the value to true, then the value over here for this one is double. The value over here becomes smoking, and the value over here becomes yes. So I need to tell Power Apps what the true and the false means for that patch function to send the correct data over to SharePoint. So let's go and take a look at that formula again. So I'll go and save it. We'll go take a look at the yes. And now let's go back to our toggle switch over here and see for the single line of bed, the value I put in an if function, that if the toggle switch value equals false, then send single text as the data. Otherwise, go and mark it as double. See how it's trying to make sense over here? This actually is the big piece over here that you've got to understand, because literally this section was all just copy and paste. That was the easy part. But in the pets one, it's the same thing. Again, I got to explain what does that yes mean. The yes for my pets one is no, but if it is toggled on, then that's a yes. Same thing happened on the single and double bed as well. That if it was, in the smoking, non-smoking, if the toggle switch was off by default, that means non-smoking. See, false, non-smoking, otherwise smoking, and then just paste over there. So those were the two interesting ones over here. We did the lookup with the choice type column. Now let's go and take a look at the manage metadata. Now, a while back, I actually did a whole separate video just on this one because it was in the early times. I think I did that video like 4 years ago. But now it's actually a lot easier to understand because we've done this a few times, all right? And again, when how I was talking about the choice type columns, this section over here, the O data type, you just do a copy and paste. Same thing over here. This one for the manage metadata type, you've got to go ahead and paste this connection because it needs some way to go ahead and reference that taxonomy which is over there. So if you notice, for the choice type column, the event and for the lookup column, it is connecting to the SP list expanded reference. For the manage metadata type column, it is going ahead and referencing the expanded taxonomy. So kind of keep careful when doing copy and paste. Don't copy the wrong one, like don't copy the choice one for the managed data and vice versa. It can get a little interesting over there. But what I recommend to you is that when you are, say, replicating this and you copied it from the description below, copy it. But then after that, make sure that you always have all of these. You've got to have the term grid, label, path, value, and the WSSID. You need all of those. But you've got to reference it to whatever was that gallery. In my case, it was the gallery which was there. But so you go ahead and put in the gallery name, dot selected, and then whatever was in this section over here, the term grid, that's the one that you want to search on the right. WSSID, that's the one that you want to search. So you see, that resemblance makes a lot of sense. And then just make sure that when you're starting it, you've got a brackets, you open the brackets, and then you close it. And after that, moment you do it all the way I've explained it, you won't get any squiggly lines. Your function has worked really well. And that was the manage metadata column. So now that you've seen that, let's go and finish off with the date type columns as well, because the date type columns is very simple. The only difference between that one and the text one is that when we had a text on the top, you had to put in the dot text. While over here, you just got to put in the dot value, and then it'll make sure that you get the correct date values from the SharePoint column, which in our case was arrival and departure. And the moment you do that, it works really well. So now let's switch gears and take a look at what it was to edit an existing item. Now, important thing when it comes to edit is that you've got to tell the patch function which item you are editing. Because if you don't do that, even though you think that it's editing, it'll actually add a new item. And that can start getting things a little messy in your SharePoint list. And so in order for you to edit the correct item, you need to know what is the ID, and then you've got to go and use the lookup function. And the lookup function for that ID works so well because you can see no delegation warnings over there, no squiggly lines. It just works. And best thing about SharePoint lists is it automatically goes ahead and creates an ID column for you. So you don't have to even do anything to create a numbering value. It does it for you automatically. So that's why when I was editing it, I now said my button was that if you edit the varEditForm equals true, if that is true, that means we are editing an existing item. And when editing existing item, go ahead and use the lookup function over there. And so the moment we did that, after that, it is all exactly the same. In fact, I went in and did a copy and paste because it all just works over there. It's the same things that I just explained to you. It came in over here. The only difference was in the patch. For new item, we went and used the defaults. Over here, we used the lookup. Just make sure that when you're right towards the end, you will be adding one more extra bracket because in the top, the if function has a bracket and then all the other patches. So over here, normally you would just have one curly brackets and then the parenthesis one. In this case, you have still at one curly brackets, but you also have two parentheses, the big one coming from that if function. And then after that, I went ahead and, the pop function, the variable for the pop function was for that trust but verify kind of a thing. The edit form was false. All of these other ones, they are just to go ahead and reset all of these controls. So this one will get reset to blank. This one will get reset. You see all of these names, those are the ones that are getting reset over here in my formula. See, these are all the ones that I get reset away. And that's actually a good thing to do because you want to reset them all so that it doesn't remember all the previous data you have, and that can cause confusion, especially when a new item is being added. So we just covered how you can go ahead and add and go ahead and edit these items over there, especially when you do a single item using the patch function. Now let's switch gears and see how you can do that in bulk. Now for the bulk operations, we first again have to go and take a look at the SharePoint list. And if you saw the video that I published last week about the shopping list app, then you're familiar with the SharePoint list because that's exactly what I'm replicating over here. I have a SharePoint list, which I call as my shopping list template, because this is where all the data is going to come in for us to create that bulk items, all that as new items or editing them. So in my first case, I'm adding new items in bulk, which means I need to get those items from somewhere. So I actually have a SharePoint list template, and it really doesn't matter what are the column types over here. For the sake of mine, I made it a single line of text, and I just have the choice type column. That's all I have. But in this case, all you're doing is you're getting the items in bulk, and you need a way to reference that. Then I also have a SharePoint list where I'm going to save the data over there. So those are the two things. If you're going to use bulk, especially when you're adding data in bulk, you need some way to go ahead and get the data. Now I went and did that in a SharePoint list. You could actually embed a data directly into your app, like it's part of the app, and you can pull that from there as well. Like when the app starts, you can have a clear collect right there inside the app. You could do that as well. Or in my case, I'm putting it into another data source, which in this case is a SharePoint list. And then remember, this is the one where the data is being stored. So now let's go and take a look at the multiple items place, all right? So this is what happened over here. I first came to a place and it went ahead and automatically populated, the data that I had. So if I would have clicked on groceries, it went ahead and filtered it to the groceries one only. So this data is coming directly from this SharePoint list. That's how I'm able to go ahead and populate all of that. Now what I do is I go ahead and save it. And the saving, which is adding new items, all of that happens in bulk. And to prove that to you, watch this. Even though you're seeing this right now, this is actually a temporary data being stored into a collection. But when I go ahead and now click on saving it, that's when it'll get saved over here. Because remember, when we just go ahead and come over here and I'm selecting either back to school, it just shows me in the collection inside the app. It hasn't saved any data over here. And I'll prove that to you. I'll do a reset and see there's no data stored over here. But when I go back to my app and I say, okay, I want to save it now, and I click on yes, you will see that it did something. It did it really fast, but it did something. And now when I go back to my list and I'll go ahead and refresh it, it went and saved all that data. So remember, now we've actually got data saved over here. So now that I've saved it and I've added new items in bulk, I want to go and do some editing in bulk. And so for that, I'll just go and click on my pencil and it takes me to this new screen, which shows me all the data that I have over here. Now, I've also gone and used this functionality because I used the back to school, which is basically the back to school items. This data is now coming from the list that we saved it from. And if you notice over here, all I have is the category back to school. I don't have anything for the grocery category. So if I were to click on it, by default, it goes blank. Because remember, this now, what you're seeing over here is not this template list, but it is actually the list where we saved it. So kind of plan how we would do that, all right? And then so back to school, and here I want to do things in bulk. So I've actually gone ahead and now, come up with this design for myself. So what I'm actually going into doing is now, okay, I'm going to say that the socks, purchased them from the grocery store, all right? Shoes from the mall. I'm just putting myself some notes over here just so that we can get the effect of how things are happening. From the mall, and I'll go and mark these as completed. I'll go and mark that as completed. And for that, I'll go and click on save, and we're done. So it went and saved it. It happens really fast, which is awesome. But let's go just make sure it's all working, all right? So I come back to my SharePoint list. Remember, this is the list where data is being saved. I refreshed it, and you see it all happened over here. 2 of them were marked completed. Its categories, so their status is changed to completed. Even my notes came through over here, all right? Now, if I go back to my Power Apps over here, I can always, go out somewhere. I can come back into my multiple items. I can go and make sure that, yep, I'm in the editing, and it was from my back to school. Automatically goes and pre-populates everything. And I'll show you the formulas for that. But for the sake of it, say I just went ahead and completed everything. It's all completed. I'll click on save, and we are done. Again, happens really fast. And go back to my SharePoint list. I'll just go ahead and refresh it for now. And you'll see all of these are marked completed. I didn't add any notes for the other ones. Therefore, it didn't add anything. But the data is all over here. It went ahead and completed that. So now, how did this happen in this bulk operations? Well, let's go take a look at that. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to first go outside and we go to multiple items. And let's take a look at that first scenario is when we are adding items in bulk. And for that, we were in this screen. And just as a full disclosure, what I did was, this is how I planned it, is that when I'm adding multiple items, I went and put that into one screen. And then when I'm going ahead and doing editing in the multiple bulk ways, I'm going and did that in another screen as well. So that's basically how I planned that, all right? So now when I come to this screen over here, this section is actually coming in from a collection. And here's how that collection gets populated. You can see under items, it is collection temp. COL is prefix for collection. So I go to this list over here, by the way. This list is basically pulling directly from the SharePoint list template. That's the SharePoint list template that I talked about over here, this list template. But because I wanted to only see distinct items of the category, in the app, I went and used the distinct function. But what I need to show you right now is in the onSelect. In the onSelect, I am getting all the items, filtered items from that shopping list template, which is again from this shopping list template. I'm getting that. I'm filtering it based on which category I selected, and I'm going and saving that to a collection. So that's how I went ahead and basically constantly getting that. When I selected for the back to school, That's what I got. Selected for the grocery, that's what I got. For each of them, it's always saved in the collection. The collection gets updated based on the filtered item of the category that I do. The other magic happens is when I click on the save. So if I click on the save, again, the whole trust but verify happens. And then I click on the yes button. When I click on the yes button, here is the other patch function that happens. Now this patch function is very similar to the other one we just did. However, there's one difference. In the first one, we were only doing single items. Over here, we are doing it in bulk, multiple ones. And so the trick for that is you go and do all of it in a for all function. For all, we're going and using the patch function. And now we notice that since we're adding inside the patch function, I'm putting in defaults, which means you just learned that tip which I gave you is that these are all new items that are coming in. And then from here on, it's already very similar to the one that I showed you. Over here, I intentionally went and put it the user one because you're actually going and saving a data to the SharePoint's list of people and groups column. And for that, you've got to go ahead and use this formula for the patch function. Again, you go ahead and make sure that the column type, which is the name of the column assigned to, that's the one for the people and groups. You've got to go ahead and put in what is the OData connection, and then you've got to go ahead and put in the claims, department, display. See, all of them don't really have to be populated. The only ones that really need to be populated are actually 4 of them. Is the OData type, you got to mention what the OData type is, claims, display name, email address, and that's it. All the other ones, I've left it just blank, and it still works, all right? So that's basically the key ones over here. Remember the example of the status one? The status one is the choice type column. Same thing over here, choice type column. So I go and say, what is the value? And then I put in this OData connection over here. So again, when it came to the bulk, when you are adding a new item to the bulk, again, remember, new item and adding a new item, for that, I had to go ahead and use all of these formulas over here. So in the previous scenario, which we saw, we were only adding one new item. I could do a bulk of operations from same thing over in that list as well. As long as I put it inside a for all, it would still work and it would work the exact same way. Now what I want to do is I want to switch gears and talk about the final pieces. How did I edit items in bulk and why that became a lot more easier? So let's go actually take a look at that, all right? So I'm going to go and click on no, and I'm going to actually go outside, click on home, do the multiple items. We're actually going and doing some editing. And this is the one that we're going to do it in bulk. In fact, the one that we just went ahead and populated that. So what's the difference over here? Well, first of all, the data itself, like this SharePoint list, it is now saved. I mean, this SharePoint gallery, it is also saved in a collection. But how am I populating that collection, all right? And for that, we go and take a look at this gallery. Again, it's also just showing only the distinct items, but this one's on select is a little different. Its on select is actually going ahead and getting a clear collect, but it's pulling it from the SharePoint list item tracking. The data where actually the data is stored, that's where it is getting from. So it kind of makes sense now that you think about it. When we were creating a new item, it pulled it from the template. But now that we're editing it, I need the data that comes in over here. So that's how I was able to go ahead and now get the data in the on select. From the on select though, we still had to do some work on the form. So let me show you some examples. Like over here, when we are getting the item, this is coming from the title because the title is now, remember, not talking directly to the SharePoint list, it's talking to the collection. Same thing over here. The notes are coming from that collection. The only thing in this, just to make things a little interesting, is I went ahead and now used the radio buttons over there, not the toggle switch, just to give you a little variety. And over here too, it was the same thing, is that this item.status.value, that's the default data that's coming in. So whatever was the value on that collection, which you've saved it to, it'll go and show it over here. So on that list, if it was say in progress, then it would automatically toggle over to, or it would select the in progress button and so on and so forth over here. But when you make a change, we need to first update the collection because we're going to go and patch that entire collection. And there are 2 places where the changes are happening. We're going and adding comments and we're going in and selecting a radio button. So for both of them in their on change, we've got to go ahead and update the patch item. So let's take a look at this one since I've already got clicked on it. This is the radio buttons, right? So in the radio buttons, when I go and select on it, I go and look at the on change. And in the on change, I'm going ahead and doing another simple patch. And see, that patch function is really simple. I go ahead and say I'm doing the patch for the collection. Remember again, I've already saved the data in the collection. Right now, I'm only referencing the collection. I'm going and doing a lookup for that ID and I update the status, whether it was completed or in progress, I'm updating that. So that's how I do it for this one. I also need to update the collection for the text. So in the text, again, I select the control. On the property, I go ahead and select for its on change, and it's the exact same thing. I go ahead and update the notes, but here I go ahead and use something called as the self.text, because what happened in this case is very interesting, that I did not want to reference the actual control name. The control name is text.input3. The reason I do that is, for some reason, when you go and use that, it would go ahead and actually update all of them. It was a very interesting thing that was happening. You would actually start seeing duplicates, and it gets confusing as to why am I having these duplicates coming in only when the first item should be updated. To avoid all of that, in the on change for that patch, don't reference the control name. Don't reference the control name, which in this case is text input 3. Go ahead and use the self, because it knows which control you've selected, and the moment you use self, Power Apps Studio knows that, okay, that's the control that I want to use. So use the self for that, because it works, and it works really well. Now that all the patches and all the columns, all these rows in the patches are updated, we finally go and click on the save button. I'll go and look at the yes button. Believe it or not, it's as simple over here. That is it. All I had to do was use patch, and I had to go ahead and use the collection. That's it. No big long formula. You just tell that I'm patching it to that list, and here's the collection. Now, Daniel, if that is the case, then why do we have these things over here? Now, I'll show you a couple of interesting things that happened over here, because it's important that you know this. When I was doing a patch this way, there are certain columns inside SharePoint. They are built in, they're hard-coded columns that you cannot do anything to. However, when we were going and doing a patch function was trying to update those hidden columns as well, and you start getting errors, and the errors actually make sense. It will say that these columns cannot be updated, or these are SharePoint columns, they cannot be updated. You'll get these type of errors, and I got them for all these column types: version number, file name with extension, full path, has path attachment, so on and so forth. And so what I initially started to do was I said, let me just drop these columns. So if you don't know what drop column or show or add column is, or show column, it is a way where you can have a collection, and a collection by default has all the columns, but then you can use the drop column function to remove all of those columns from the existing collection. You determine which one it was. So I was trying that first. I said that I'll go ahead and, okay, I was getting errors for the version number. It said that you cannot go and patch with the version number because that is already a built-in column. With only read-only access. So I removed version. Then the error changed to file name with extension, changed to full path. So as I was fixing it, this list was growing. So I said, you know what? I'm thinking this wrong. Instead of me dropping columns, let me just go ahead and show columns, which means build a whole new columns in the same collection and only get the columns that I want. So that's why you see collection existing items is the collection that we're storing to. But inside that, I did another clear collect referencing the same columns. But I'm saying that from this entire collection that I have, I am only going to go ahead and take these 5 of them, which is the status, notes, ID, and title. And it just worked. The show columns took it. So I was able to update that. And then I just went ahead and patched it. The moment I did that, all those errors went away. And it worked, and it worked really well. So that was basically the big trick that I want to show you. Besides the wow factor that your formula gets so small when you're doing it in bulk, because remember, we're just patching now as an update. We're not doing a new items, but just this is the trick. Don't use the drop one, use the show columns, and only reference the columns that you want to patch, and the data will update, and it works really well. So hopefully you found this video helpful, because we did a comprehensive study on the patch function. We started by first just adding and editing single items, and then we did the whole thing in bulk. And I shared some tips and tricks on how to use that self function. That self function actually went ahead and avoided a whole bunch of errors for me. And instead of using the drop columns, use the add columns, because that went ahead and filtered the collection that I was going to use for the bulk. So hopefully this was helpful, and as always, keep using Power Apps. Hey everyone, hopefully you found this video useful. And if you did, can you help me help you? Can you subscribe to this YouTube channel? Because remember, I provide fresh content on a weekly basis, and it's 100% free. So if you have subscribed, thank you so much, and pass the word. But if you haven't, subscribe, click on the bell notification, and let the learning begin.